Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and for those of you listening, not watching, I'll describe it to you. My guest and I are both outside on our own individual virtual hikes right now. We are getting out there after it because that is today's topic. We are going to be talking about hiking and, the role that can play with mental health recovery. Hiking is something that you know what? It does seem to be trending a little bit more recently, but it's definitely something that I haven't seen a lot of people doing, especially from the younger generations. But I grew up in the very mountainous region of North New Jersey, and I would hike, all the time. And it's definitely something that I miss. Moving down south, you find out there's well, at least here on the east coast of Georgia, there are no mountains to hike. Last time I went on a mountain hike, I found via the internet, it was a 10-foot hill. And so I found the southern context for hike is a little bit different, but we're here with a man who hikes many mountains. He's a wilderness first responder, a podcast host, and a mindful hiking guide. So we're going to get into that. Mr. Mike Martin, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be a wonderful conversation. I love the fact we get to celebrate not only my journey, your work, but also nature. One of the most important things that's out there for us.
Yeah, so let's start right there with was your appreciation and admiration of nature always there since a young age?
So, as a young kid, I remember growing up chasing my grandfather around on all his outdoor adventures. So it was always one of those things. We were always, fishing, camping, hiking, whatever the case may be. And then he had a massive stroke, which
Mm,
left him in a chair and he couldn't do anything. So that kind of took that out of my life for a long time. And toward the end of his life is when I got back into it. And I thought I was out there chasing that connection, with him, with the memories and things
right.
like that. But turn out about a year or two after he passed, I was really out there discovering myself, building that kind of connection. And it turned out to be a life-saving adventure, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know a lot of individuals, especially veterans I've talked to, and people who just want to rediscover themselves or their identity post-service, they go out west and kind of just live the country life for a little while, or a lot of them just go backpacking or hiking through the mountains. Whether it's they need to prove something to themselves that they did it, or just to disconnect from society for a bit before going back. I've seen a lot of people do that. And so when you talk about going back out there to find yourself, I mean, what did that look like? What did that feel like?
Well, that adventure started with the words, "You have nothing to prove or nothing to offer myself or your children." That was how I found out I was facing my second divorce. And at the time, I was living out of my truck as a result of that.
Mm,
So the only real aspect to life that I still had in our day-to-day world was I kept my job. Outside of that, I was just kind of floating around doing my thing. And those words actually triggered a suicide attempt. So I went back that night after that and tried to end my life. I woke up the next morning and I stumbled back to my truck and turned on one of my favorite hunting podcasts. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Stoic author Ryan Holiday or not, but he just happened to be the guest on that episode where I was at my lowest. And
mm.
in the conversation, he started throwing out all these Marcus Aurelius quotes. And it was like being smacked in the face, realizing that, yeah, I was just told that I was worthless the night before, had nothing to offer anybody. But given my situation, if I could turn my life around, get back on my feet, I could teach the most important people in my life, my children, a very beneficial lesson about overcoming adversity and redefine who I was. And that's kind of where my whole journey, as far as becoming a mindful meditation, hiking guide, and things like that, ended up happening. I sort of stumbled into it because I got into talk therapy as to help me with my issues and get dealing with depression and anxiety. And one day she brought up meditation, and I fought her for the whole hour. I was like, "That's stupid. I'm not shaving my head. I'm not going to go.
Right,
I'm not going
right.
to go buy a chant CD." And then I went out back and I picked up my crossbow and I started doing my nightly practice. And I'm like, dude, this is everything I just argued about. But sitting here in my yard or sitting in my house where I was living at the time, I was afraid my roommate would judge me. So I had to go somewhere that was safe for me. And the safest place that I know is the wilderness.
Yeah.
So getting out there and actually sitting down, touching grass, as my youngest son would say, and and
Yeah.
just building this connection step without any stories or anything like that. It helped me to take that mask and put it down. It helped me to come to terms and understand that where somebody would label, with depression and anxiety and all these different negative things that became my identity, I could put them away. I could just be me. And I started hiking more and more and more and getting back into all these different things and literally building my self confidence, my self worth, one swing of a hatchet at a time through these backpacking trips through, my area up here in Michigan and through like the Ohio Valley and places like that. And when I was going through the Ohio Valley, I started finding the Hopewell mounds and things like that. And I'd sit up there and I'd meditate. And I'm very skeptical about, all the spiritual things and things like that, or at least I was at the time. But sitting on this one particular mound at, I believe it was the Indian Burial Mound Park, and feeling presence around me, kind of poking at all the things that I still wasn't comfortable with or ignored, even though I knew they were there, and felt them like pulled out of me. It was like that moment where it was like, man, this is so impactful that to be able to share it with other people would be not only fulfilling because of the way that, my life changed based on just listening to a podcast, but also just to be a part of that and share where I've been and help other people to, go forward on their journeys. It was something that I just kind of started doing as a passion project, and it's turned into now a way of life.
Yeah, one thing we've talked about on the show a couple of times is that a single conversation can change someone's life. And we've talked about the power of podcasting, how we don't know when or where, but that our episode might change someone's life. And you talked about how a podcast episode was a wake-up call for you. They recorded that episode not knowing who was going to listen to it, when they were going to listen to it, or where it was going to be listened to, or what impact it might even have. I mean, same with you're a podcast host as well. So sometimes you put out episodes and you feel like you're throwing it into the void, the abyss, and you never know who it's going to reach. It's always about that one person that it needs to reach. So I think that's a very beautiful part of your journey. And yeah, I think a lot of people don't a lot of people try to do meditation or prayer at home, but honestly, I think going out in nature is the best way to do it. For example, there's a lot of people who do yoga, but yoga on the beach is a very popular option. And you know why? It's beautiful. You're outside, you feel connected, whether that's to God or nature. And same with like a couple Easters ago, I remember my father and I were part of this group that we hiked to the top of a mountain so that we could pray all together on top of the mountain on Easter morning, as the sun was rising. And that was such a beautiful thing. There's such a strong connection in nature. It's something I always talk about on the show is people are getting slowly more and more confined to smaller boxes and smaller rooms as we see the apartment size in New York City and places just getting smaller and smaller and more expensive. We're just getting like further trapped. We've had studies on my show going over like health risks from lack of exposure to sunlight even. So one of the things I talk about is how I'm very grateful for my dog because even though I work, a job where I'm inside on a computer all day, every hour or so she says, "Hey, we're going outside for a walk." And even if I didn't have her, I think just going out, I like this practice I have of 5 to 7 times a day at least, going out for a walk and just refreshing and reconnecting. And I just like the dog because it makes me feel better. You talk about being self-conscious, you don't want to meditate, with your friends nearby. Same thing. If I don't have my dog, I'm just walking around. It seems weird. I seem like a creep, So that's why like I have my dog with me so I look normal. But it's so important, even if you can't go hiking, that the point being that even if you don't have mountains by you, like here in East Georgia, wherever you may be, if you don't have mountains, if you don't have pre-built nature trails or just going outside and getting that fresh air and sunlight is already one powerful step. And then so let's go into, I mean, obviously we mentioned your podcast host, but you also do, you run a business now as well to give back. So I want to talk about, your guided hiking and your everything that's entailed with that. So do you lead groups of people? Is it one-on-one? How does that all work?
So I do both. I do the group setting, but also I'll take somebody out on, a solo, I guess you could say, with me on a long hike. Go out for 3 or 4 days
Yeah.
and really work on actually building outdoor skills because, like I said earlier, for me, building my self-confidence up came one swing of a hatchet at a time.
Mm,
I do a lot of things. A lot of my work is based on visual evidence. You know, everybody talks about all the studies and all the numbers and this and that. But when
right.
you actually put a hatchet in somebody's hand and you teach them how to build a shelter, or you teach them how to build a fire, gather their own food, and do things like that, it's something that when they're in a moment where they're struggling and they're questioning themselves, they can look back and say, I actually did that. I can actually see that I built something with my hands. For me, that was really important. And through my work, as I've helped other people, it's become just as important to them to actually have that physical reminder. And with a lot of the meditation work that we do on these trails, we actually sit down and we'll like visualize, for example, the clouds in the sky. We all have that problem with our racing thoughts. We all get worked up. But if you actually take those thoughts and you put them on a cloud that you could see one thought per cloud, it helps you to bring yourself back in and realize, man, those thoughts are spinning, but I still have the option to get off the hamster wheel. I can still control those thoughts. And for me, that visualization along with storytelling is so powerful because, with the other aspect of it, I do actual meditation workshops and classes. And to have a great example, bridging that gap from doing just the podcast to coming in person.
Yeah.
The very first class, this older lady coming into the class, and she was actually the very first person to walk in. Totally did not fit the demographic or anything like that. But the first thing out of her mouth was, "I really need this right now," you know.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, after walking her through with the group, to see the impact, it just verifies all that hard work that I put in with my journey and being able to share that with somebody else. It's a very special thing. So as far as the business goes, it's more about the actual connection
Yeah, of course.
than it is about what numbers you're putting in the bank.
Yeah, and then speaking of, just giving back to the community and connections, you're a wilderness first responder. So what does that look like? Is that firefighting? Is that different? Like what is involved with that?
So for me, that was basically going through the training to further enhance my ability when I take somebody out in the field. So, when you get out on a trail with me, if something happens, that means that I've got the training behind me to be able to respond and to get you out safely and taken care of. I mean, with that, that also opens the doors down the line to do search and rescue and this and that. But for me, it was mainly the focus of just having that extra ability and that extra knowledge in the backpack should something actually come up.
Okay, yeah, it's about just being not just a guy who meditates in the woods, about being a true guide, who could
Exactly.
lead the people you're with and keep them safe. And so, We mentioned a few times on top of this your the Project Mindfully Outdoors podcast. So what is that about? Obviously, we've heard your story. Does it go further into that? Is it about just daily lessons and stuff like that?
So one of the main things that I've really come to understand it throughout my adventures and my travel is the fact that we figure out life in real time based off of the environment that we're in and the resources that we have. So for me with the podcast, that was exactly how it started out. Was I was learning all these new things, these new techniques to help not only deal with my depression, my anxiety, but my overall well-being. And I started incorporating that into small, like 10, 15-minute episodes that now air daily. So 7 days a week, there's a 10 to 15-minute podcast that comes out that shares the not only the practices, some of my adventures, but also the philosophy behind wilderness meditation that I built. And then there's also on YouTube, I get together with, various people around a campfire and we'll have a conversation that airs twice a week, the campfire sessions. And I do a lot of things to really put that message out there because, as we talked about in the beginning, it was that one simple hour-long podcast that had nothing to do with the subject, really, when you look at it, that saved
Yeah.
my. So putting that out there is it's one of the core values of what Project Mindfully Outdoors is all about.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know even this conversation who it might reach and might get them outside. And like I said, I definitely encourage everyone to get outside. And then when I had first gone to your website earlier this morning, there was a pop-up about a book based on the wisdom of the groundhog. Can you tell us about that? Is that a new recent project?
So actually, it was one of those things where I do my classes, and I figure since, it's the month of February, it would be fun to explore the groundhog as a spirit animal because I like to take time and actually visualize spending time with an animal through the meditations.
Right.
And as I started to explore it and think about the fact that, on the 2nd of February, somebody in an old coat grabs a groundhog and makes it look at its shadow. That's all we really know.
Yeah, it's a strange thing.
It's funny and it's got that little historical thing to it, but there's so much more because when you think about the fact that a groundhog spends most of its time in its burrow, resting, rejuvenating, grounding itself until it comes out to go eat and look for a shadow and then run away and hide again. There's so many beautiful representations that we can take away from that. Just like one of the most important ones is understanding that we can build that same burrow around ourselves and hold boundaries to protect ourselves. Because when I think back to how I started telling you my story about that second divorce, I had nothing to offer anybody, were the words that she told me. It was a very mentally abusive relationship that I was on the receiving end of. So it completely destroyed me. Had I been aware of that and thought about it, I could have put up boundaries and protected myself. But because it just kind of filtered and built on things that were already going on and already there, I didn't think about it. But when we take this time to actually reflect on ourselves and build that burrow, it's a safe space where you can ask yourself and you can really explore who you are and set those boundaries so that you're protecting yourself. You're allowing yourself space to grow, but you're not taking yourself out of the relationships that you build. You're allowing those connections to build as well and maintain that healthy parameter.
Right. I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from animals. One of the ones that we've gone over the most on the show is actually horses and equestrian for like veterans and PTSD, for just understanding yourself, for lessons on forgiveness, and we've done a lot of horsemanship stuff. But you would be the first guest that we've really talked about Groundhog's Day, and the groundhog. And I assume you've gone over other animals or you will in the future, so that's definitely something to check out. And I mean, what is the future looking like for you as far as like, any big projects coming up, or obviously you have the constantly trying to expand the podcast and get more and more people to get out there and experience that, change that you felt with nature. But anything big coming for the future?
Well, for me, there's going to be this year a lot of focus on the local area. Because, obviously with starting a podcast in the beginning, it was kind of this broad net.
Yeah.
But now transitioning and bringing these classes, bringing these hikes together, this whole side of camp is kind of focused within the area, although it doesn't mean that I won't come out somewhere else and go for a hike in that. But, for building purposes, I've really realized it's about putting that seed in the ground and just letting it germinate because it's doing these live events and stuff like that in the area has really changed the demographic. It's helping grow a lot of things. And then, for me personally, it's just incorporating a new set of life challenges into figuring out how to go forward and how to manage my health and, things like that. So it's just kind of, like I said, Project Mindfully Outdoors for me is a lifestyle. And as I evolve, it evolves.
Yeah, no, I totally get that for sure. So we'll have, your website and description below for anyone who wants to check out the podcast, if they want to, get in contact with you to go on a hike or to explore, that relationship with you further, as well as you have a ton of blogs and resources for them to check out. And so we'll have that all in the description below. And I want to thank you for your time today. Like I said, hopefully someone hears this and another call to action is just go outside today. Hopefully it's nice out, and just spend some time outside. And you don't have to pray, you don't have to meditate. You can just experience it, just live it, just be out there.
That's the most important part. I want to thank you, my friend, for celebrating my work and my journey with me.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride. Jokes and laughter fill the air, on this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, a source of great pride.